screen. Then turn your cameras off. Those recordings will be circulated to the people that wanted to be here and couldn't. So I'm really pleased that today we're going to be running this session in the company of Tim from Morgan Sindall Construction and my colleague Helen from Groundwork North Eastern Cumbria, who'll be bringing to life some of the things we're talking about through some practical examples from the Northeast. The kind of setup for these events is that they're intended to be really very informal. You can contribute in any way you wish. You can either, use chat function as usual. We should be through our presentations with enough time to take any questions or have any conversation that you want to have. That said, if you just want to sit back and listen, drop us an email afterwards, that's entirely fine too. No obligations on anyone attending. So I'm going to kick off and I'm going to ask Gary to just move the slides on one and give you a little bit of a grounding for those who may be new or unfamiliar to our organisation. Just in a couple of minutes, we began life as a charity against a backdrop of economic decline and industrial restructuring in the late 1970s, early 1980s. But that was also a period when we had the first stirrings of consciousness really about things like global warming and the environmental threat. Round about the same time as Groundwork was kicking off, the expansion of Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace networks was underway around the globe and in the UK in particular. And our mission as a charity at the outset was to support communities to address the physical signs and symptoms of that decline in their local areas, to use that as a springboard for social and economic recovery, but also bring to life the local to global philosophy. So the idea that if you encourage people and support people to look after the environment on their doorstep, then they're more likely to engage positively and constructively in some of those bigger environmental issues. So there are a number of principles that underpinned the work that we did. One is that we do nothing on our own. So Groundwork has always worked in partnership. When you're dealing with such kind of significant structural issues, that's not a job for any single organisation. So finding our way into partnerships, bringing partnerships together to address those issues, one of the guiding principles of our organisation. The second one is that we're about building the capacity of communities to address the issues that they think are important in their local area. So effectively putting professional skills at the disposal of local people to deliver projects, services, activities that are going to make a difference in their lives and in their neighbourhoods. And the third one is that we're resolutely focused on getting stuff done. Very pragmatic, all about practical action, all about making things happen on the ground so that people can see a kind of visible and tangible change to the world around them that gives them the confidence that broader change is within their grasp and something that they can have some influence over. We move on, Gary. A lot has clearly changed in the 40 years since we were set up in 1981, but those principles, I think, remain. So we're still focused on places, the physical environment, but also the social infrastructure within those places. We're still delivering recovery and regeneration, stimulating economic activity in what might be called left behind places. Increasingly, that means connecting people into jobs in a low carbon economy with green skills and so on and so forth. And we're still equipping and empowering people to take action on the issues that matter to them. And what we're seeing more and more of these days is the things that do matter to communities are connected with climate change, they're connected with the decline in our natural environment. And what makes Groundwork slightly different, and for us that work within it special, I think, it is the ability to try and join up those things in integrated solutions. So demonstrating that we can have some influence and impact on social issues, environmental issues, and economic issues at the same time. If you move on, Gary, give everybody just a quick illustration and overview of what we look like now. and how we operate now. So Groundwork's a network of 15 different organisations operating around the UK, with Groundwork UK as a national central body supporting and promoting the whole of that local activity. That means we can operate nationally with that kind of scale, and you can see some of the numbers down the left-hand side. When you add up all the different bits of Groundwork, you can see it gets to some significant numbers in terms of people involved, community supported, outputs and outcomes delivered. But it also means within those local areas, we can have kind of reach and insight so that we understand, what makes communities work in those areas, what the issues they're grappling with are, and how we can then translate those into wider solutions. Next slide, please, Gary. So when those 15 organisations come together, as they do very often, we agree things like a collective strategy that underpins all of the work that Groundwork does around the country. So this is it on a page, nice condensed version. And it talks about what we want to deliver, why we think our work's important, and how we'll go about our work. But it also talks about how we'll improve the quality and capability of our organisations to meet evolving and emerging need. I won't talk through the whole of this. It's there for you to glance at. It's on our website should you want to explore it further. But I will draw your eye to the goals section on the right-hand side, because these are the areas that we're specifically focusing on in this series of briefings. And these are areas where we either want to increase our impact, grow our scale, innovate to find new solutions, or build new relationships and new partnerships that enable us to do more and have more impact through our work. And today's focus is on the third of those goals, which is about helping people connect with nature. If we move on, Gary. This has clearly been core business for Groundwork since we were established in 1981. When we were working with communities on overspill estates on the urban fringe that were probably characterised by having little usable green space within them, but also limited access to the countryside that was around them. Those are some of the issues that people recognised, that people were kind of almost trapped in housing estates with little infrastructure, little connectivity. And although they might have been surrounded by open countryside, very few people actually went there and experienced that connection with nature. And for us, this has remained a clear social justice issue because we know, and all the evidence tells us, that those who would most benefit from being connected with nature, from being in the outdoors, from engaging in physical activity in natural surroundings, are precisely the people who are least likely to do that, because they've got least access to those facilities. So if you're from a low-income background, an ethnic minority background, if you've got a long-term health condition or a disability, then you're less likely to visit open spaces and be connected with nature than other people in society, and that just clearly doesn't feel right. So some of that is about very basic facts in terms of the quantity, the quality, the location of that green and blue infrastructure. Some of it is more about social barriers. Some of it's about cultural relevance. Some of it's about perceptions of safety. So for all sorts of reasons, people aren't getting the benefit of that connection with nature that we know, again, from the evidence base, can be hugely impactful in terms of health and well-being and our connection with the community and our understanding of the world. And we also know that areas with less or lower quality green space are also more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, whether that's because of excess heat or the risk of flooding or greater air pollution. Again, good quality green and blue infrastructure mitigates against all of those risks. And if you're living in a low-income area, if you're living in the high-density area, then you're less likely to have those protections, and therefore you're more at risk to those environmental harms as the climate changes. So what are the answers to this? Well, there's a number, we think. One is we just need more and better quality green and blue infrastructure in the places where people live. So that mission that we've had for 40 years about greening urban areas, about helping people kind of change the physical fabric of the places in which they live, still remains for us hugely, hugely important. But we also need to help people overcome the barriers that they may face in accessing that green and blue infrastructure. that may be barriers, physical barriers like transport access, but as I say, it may also be social, cultural barriers. People just not feeling that these spaces are relevant to them or accessible to them, or they don't know what to do in them, or they don't have the right kit. So there's lots of reasons why people from different backgrounds, different communities may not feel comfortable in those green and blue spaces. And then thirdly, we need to provide more and better opportunities for people from all backgrounds to become champions of the natural environment. And that means facilitating access. It means providing education. It means developing and delivering projects and programs where people can get practically involved in doing something about the physical fabric of the places around them and our shared natural environment. So those are the things that we're trying to do more of. That's what our strategy is all about. I'm going to now hand the talking stick to Tim, who is going to tell us why all of this is of interest to a massive construction business. I'll hand over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Graham, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. So yes, Morgan Sindall, for those who don't know, we're a construction business. In the UK, we're part of the Morgan Sindall Group, which operates across 7 divisions of construction and regeneration in the UK. Like Groundwork, we have 15 operational businesses. So we are a local contractor in 13 in England, and we have a business in Wales and a business in Scotland. So that's us. As a construction firm, we're a purpose-led organisation. Our purpose is to create inspiring places which enhance communities, in which we all live, learn, work, care, play, and protect. So that's our purpose as an organisation, and maybe you can already join the dots why Morgan Sindall and Groundwork found each other at some point in time because of that. So there are 4 things. Next slide, please, Gary. If you just click through, just so I don't, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Great. Apologies for that. So the 4 things I wanted to touch on where we are exploring this subject that we're talking about today, which is connecting communities to nature, and particularly the ones that need it the most. So one is our responsible business approach. We have a strategy. One of those elements, one of our total commitments, is to enhance communities. So last year, November, we were thinking, well, how do we further enhance the communities in which we work compared to what we already did? And we were looking towards biodiversity net gain, which was mandated finally in February 2024. And by that time, 17% of our live projects already had an assessment in place. So the solution we considered, how do we democratize then this access to nature through the mechanism of biodiversity net gain? So we're now, as you can see on the screen, we're now inviting our communities that operate where we operate in the projects that we are constructing to participate in the enhancement of biodiversity net gain. So that means where it's appropriate, we may be delivering a school or another community asset, and it might be an element of that biodiversity net gain that needs to be established that won't only benefit perhaps the users, not just in the back of the playground, it might benefit the community as a whole, particularly where those buildings have meanwhile use. So the community might engage with that asset over time. Because we believe participation is really important. And that participation could also be knowledge and skills related. It might not be that the opportunity is there to plant the trees and shrubs and anything else we're doing on the project. But perhaps there's the knowledge required to look after those things, to understand why did we choose certain species for that time of year, with the landscape architect or the ecologist. So that's one path that we're exploring. Next slide, please, Gary. And again, if we could click down to the end, probably to the next slide and that one, that would be great. Excellent. Yes. So The second thing I wanted to mention was an R&D project we've worked on in the last couple of years with our Welsh business. This project, we took a school, you can see it on the right. So we finished building the school in 2021. We're trying to explore this idea of both the use of renewable product solutions, socioeconomic outcomes, and the just transition, which is reflected in legislation in Wales, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And we're thinking, what if we used more regenerative, renewable processes? What would the outcomes be? And we found three things actually. So if you click once more on Gary, we found access to nature in Wales is surprisingly low. Well, surprising to me, maybe not, Graham, as you mentioned earlier, that you're already aware of that. But to us, it was surprising that in Wales, access to nature is extremely low. And community well-being could be improved in that asset that we delivered by reconsidering the design, sort of at the beginning of the design phase, both for meanwhile use, so the community could perhaps benefit more from that asset, and also from the design of the building and the design of the landscape to provide greater access to nature. The second thing we found is that if we revalue natural materials, in other words, thinking about how much do we pay for them and what does that mean for the, let's say for timber, for the forests that those materials come from, if more investment reaches that forest and that community, that supply chain community through the value chain, then that improves outcomes and potentially even access to nature if more money goes to these natural assets that the community do use. We walked around one of the forests in Wales and they're very well used by communities nearby, and that requires investment for paths and everything else. And the third thing was investing in local schemes. So building the built environment contributes about 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So even when the built environment has decarbonised to where it needs to be to meet climate science, there's still residual carbon left. Residual carbon left. And offsetting's got a bad reputation, but local projects are a much better way of doing that. Local planting schemes, for example, or maybe even investing in housing retrofit in the local community, in local social housing or other housing. And when we make those investment decisions, there's also a benefit to the local area in terms of nature. So those are some of the things we're finding from this project that's not quite yet finished. I just wanted to raise that as something perhaps relevant to this conversation. So Gary, next slide, please. The third out of four things I wanted to touch on today is future generations. Because the built environment in particular will almost certainly look and feel a little bit different in 20, 30 years' time in terms of how we build, what the supply chain looks like, localism, etc. So because of that, we commissioned a book with children's author Tales from Mother Earth, which is, and you can see this is the first line from the book. It's a story about an amazing tree, and the tree is called Sitka because it's a Sitka spruce. The story will teach children, primary age children, age 3 to 11, about the skills that will be required and the different jobs that are required to build with natural materials and how to keep those natural materials in use for as long as possible. So later on in the story, the classroom that the beam's installed in needs to be redesigned, so it's the wood's carefully taken apart and reconstructed again. So that book's all about our relationship with nature in relation to the productivity of forests for timber products. Next slide, please, Gary. And the final one, could zoom to the end of these bullet points. Great. This brings us to where this relationship perhaps started between us and Groundwork. So the context behind this is we charge a carbon tax from each of our regional businesses, and we have done for the last 2 or 3 years. And that generates a pot of funds. And we took the decision last year to create an award, partly to incentivize our projects to improve performance, but also to reinvest that money in a responsible way. So we, from all of our 15 businesses, we nominated a high-performing project who've made outstanding efforts to decarbonize. And we decided, I say we decided, our leaders, we all got together, the 15 directors of local businesses, and we unanimously decided that we should reinvest those funds with Groundwork to connect those who need it most to nature. So that photo there's the first project actually. On Earth Day, we worked on that project in the Northeast, and it's really part of our adjusting our focus towards just transition as well. So in our view, no one should miss out on all the well-being and economic benefits that come with the transition to net zero. So yes, we're transitioning, we're charging a carbon tax, so there's some financial element to the transition to net zero, and that money is reinvested in communities that need it. So we're early on our journey, I would say. So those 4 things point towards our sort of exploring how we consider our identity as a large construction firm in the UK, and where it's appropriate for us to make an impact, because we can't do everything, and certainly not alone, which is why partnerships are also really important to us. But I think you can appreciate we're not far on our journey, but we're exploring these kind of aspects. So I'll leave it there. That's that's our part. Thank you, Graham.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Tim, for sharing all of that fascinating stuff. So we're now going to move on to, as I say, my colleague Helen. So Helen and the team at Groundwork North East and Cumbria, for my money, are taking a lead in our network on delivering natural solutions and engaging people in innovative biodiversity enhancement and nature recovery projects. Helen's going to tell us a little bit about some of those in a bit more detail.
Yeah. Thanks, Graham.
Hand over to you, Helen.
Hi, thanks everybody. Thanks for having me today. So as Graham said, I'm here to present about some of our work with nature-based solutions. I'm primarily focusing on 2 of the larger programs that we've been delivering in the Northeast over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Forget that, I can't do it myself. Is there another one before that? Oh, one's displayed. Never mind. Okay. So yeah, so revitalising our estuaries was a large project funded by DEFRA through their Green Recovery Challenge Fund, and it was largely born out of the COVID pandemic, when we realised, obviously, that local people living in estuary areas and coastal areas had been significantly affected by the pandemic, and the aims of the project were to bring the opportunity to restore the estuary habitat, connect in with local people and the residents of these areas, and then provide youth employment and try and transition people away from grey jobs traditionally based around our heavy industries, and get them into some form of green conservation-based employment. So the 6 estuaries were in the northeast. So we had the Blythe and the Wansbeck up in Northumberland, we had the Tyne and the Wear, and then the Tees and the Esk in Whitby. So we covered the whole of the northeast coast almost. Next slide, please. So our nature-based solutions were rather unique. Some of them were the first of their kind globally. These are our fish refugia, you can see hanging there from the quay on the Blythe. And the main reason that we were using these man-made sort of structures to retrofit is because most of the estuaries in the northeast are so heavily modified that there isn't that natural space, there isn't a lot of space for nature left. You know, they're heavy shipping ports, so they're constantly dredged. So we're finding unique ways to retrofit these structures to provide that habitat for nature, provide that space for nature, and also to mitigate against the impacts of climate change, where coastal squeeze is a big problem as well. Next slide, please. Now, as Graham alluded to before, you know, all of Groundwork's work is about kind of grassroots and about working with the local community. Groundwork North Eastern Cumbria, we don't own any land. You know, we manage some land on behalf of other organisations, but you know, we wouldn't be able to deliver any of these projects if it wasn't for the support of the landowners, if it wasn't for the support of the local authorities, for the the port authorities, you know, all of the DEFRA kind of organisations. But most importantly, you know, without the support of local communities. And the community engagement was key in that, obviously, to be able to spread that message about the impact that we've had on our estuaries, and how they have been so heavily modified, and that there isn't a lot of space for nature, and how if we don't do something with regards to climate change, we're going to lose all of that intertidal habitat and all of the species that are associated with that. And then obviously, you know, as people are starting to realise the impact that climate change has on their daily lives now. So the idea was that we would connect local communities through the riparian corridor, so the green space that was next to the rivers. And if we could do some work to improve that and use those areas as well, then we could bring people down to the river, down to the estuaries, hopefully show them some of these really unusual new nature-based solutions like the floating ecosystem at Newcastle Quayside, and kind of give them an opportunity to learn more about what we were doing and why we were doing it. Next slide, please. So we were able to, with it being DEFRA funded and that being kind of administered by the lottery, obviously there's a big focus as well on the sort of wider community engagement, and the work that we've done in the past through the estuary partnerships and funded by the Environment Agency and the like was all around the capital schemes, but this really gave us an opportunity to focus on that community engagement. So we were able to provide kind of schools and education work in areas where we'd not worked before, with schools and groups that we'd never been able to engage with before. So, you know, things like Blythe Hong Kongers and a knitting group in Hebburn, you know, they weren't kind of the groups that you would traditionally associate with coming out to Groundwork, to coming out to a green space and learning about, you know, the really rare butterfly that you've got on your doorstep in Hebburn and that kind of thing. So it gave us that opportunity to kind of really tailor the activities to the group, do the activities on a day when they wanted to do them, be there when they wanted to be there, and take them out to the local green space. So there was no transport costs, there was no cost to the group themselves. It was all really kind of nice and easy for them to engage with. We put on a lot of public events as well. A really nice one that we did in Whitby was like the Esk Estuary event, where we had over 400 people, and you'll get tourists coming in down there, you'll get members of the local community coming down there, and it was supported by a huge number of community groups who came out and all did a stall about what their activity was in that area and how they were helping to look after the local area. So it was a really, really lovely event. And then we've also been able to support volunteering and provide corporate opportunities, work with the university to support their students coming through and provide them with volunteering opportunities as well. So yeah, so those are just a few of the outputs from the sort of 18-month programme. Next slide, please. So as I've mentioned earlier as well, kind of the project has 3 themes, and one of the key and really successful elements of it was around the youth employment and training. As I said, you know, young people have been really badly affected by COVID. You know, a lot of the tourism industry has been affected, the hospitality industries have gone, and a lot of the traditional kind of grey jobs that you'd associate with a Tyne, with a Weir, with a Blythe, you know, are all in decline. So providing people with an opportunity for a 6-month or a 9-month paid placement with us, and that came with a huge range of qualifications that they could get. So chainsaw licenses, bush cutter licenses, you name it. You know, there was opportunities, first aid, working by water safely. So at the end of that 6 or 9-month placement, they were really able to go on and find other work. And one of the case studies that I really like is a young lad called Jack. He was from Middlesbrough. He'd only just left school at 16. and he already had a little son at home, baby Jack. and you know, so he was with us for the 6 months. He did his placement with us, got some key kind of qualifications, certificates, and then he went on to get a job with a local building firm. You know, so he's able to really kind of support his family at home, and hopefully, you know, that'll still be the case now. So yeah, so we had 37 young people all in all involved, who completed their training with us, and at least 14 of those at the time had gone on to find other full-time employment. So really, really pleased with that output. Next slide, please. So our second project is the Wansbeck Restoration for Climate Change, and this is, as it says, in the Wansbeck catchment up in Northumberland. It's a DEFRA project that's supported by the Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero, and it's one of 6 trials in the whole of the UK, funded by the Landscape Scale Restoration for Nature, and it's all about kind of habitat restoration, but providing that opportunity for carbon sequestration and monitoring that so that we can see what the impacts are with regards to climate change. Next slide, please. It's a large partnership project involving Groundwork, obviously, Northumberland County Council, the Natural England, the Environment Agency, the Wildlife Trust, the Forestry Commission, the National Trust. So a huge number of large organisations involved. But obviously also, you know, some of the farmers, the landowners and the tenanted farmers at the National Trust, and those owning private farms in the Northumberland area. And obviously if it wasn't for them, then again we wouldn't be able to deliver this project. So, and as you can imagine, kind of, you know, trying to transition away from traditional agriculture into, you know, this new nature friendly farming it can be a difficult sell at times. Fortunately, you know, there's some good case studies coming out of this now, and other projects in the area that have delivered those. So we were able to take the farmers out on field trips and show them examples, and really kind of help them to understand, and they can talk to other farmers and see about how it's worked for them, and you know, why it's beneficial. It's not obviously always about money, but you know, these you know, people do need to make ends meet as well, and they do have a house and a roof to keep over their heads, so you know, it has to work for them. So we were able to kind of work alongside, develop and design the schemes with the landowners, so that, you know, we weren't taking up obviously significant chunks of the land. They could choose which areas that they wanted to set aside and which areas they wanted to put towards, you know, the outputs for the project. Next slide, please. So I won't spend too much time on the actual MBS schemes, but just to say that obviously a lot of it is around carbon sequestration. So we're looking at peatland restoration. So this is some heavy plant. Everybody loves a bit of heavy machinery. And these are doing grip blocking. So basically re-wetting an area that's dried out because it's been previously felled. Well, it was a timber plantation, so it's been felled and left. So we were able to turn that hopefully back into to restored peatland. And the next slide, please. It's just some of the other work, so fencing and tree planting to create that riparian buffer zone or buffer zones around agricultural land, areas of floodplain mosaic creation and re-wetting, simple things like, you know, preventing rubbish and putting these strainers across waterways so that the rubbish and the debris doesn't get washed downstream and cause blockages, and installing leaky dams, and even a site where we've got a new population of beavers, but I can't say where. So next slide, please. And again, you know, so how is often the case with our projects and with the MBS work is that you'll get funders who are interested in the actual capital schemes and funding those elements, and you'll get funders who are more interested in the community engagement and spreading that wider message. And what we try to do obviously around any project is marry those two things together. So we were able to secure some additional funding from the Shears Foundation and the Way Wind Farm, who have interest in the local area, to provide some educational and engagement opportunities. So we had some schools come out. This was a lovely little pet lamb that the pupils are looking after, and they saw how we did the soil coring so that we could look at the soil analysis and see how the restoration is going and what the soil samples are made of, and then looking at areas of wildflowers and the botanical interest and why that habitat is unique and important. Next slide, please. So these are just a few around some of the other engagement opportunities. Obviously, the schools and the youth is very important about, you know, sort of the long term and encouraging those young people to understand the issues and to take positive choices and make change happen. And then obviously there's other elements as well. So we were able to employ a consultant who could go out and deliver some art workshops for us. So we'd go out and do photography walks, we'd go out and do wildflower walks, and then the product of these was then turned into a large exhibition in Wallington Hall. So this was in the foyer of Wallington. So every single person who came to Wallington during this period would walk past this photography exhibition, and it attracted over 1,200 people kind of viewing it. And then because it was so successful, if you move on to the next slide, we were able to take some of those and turn it into a more permanent exhibition at one of the other sites. So it's kind of on a little tour of some of the other sites. So we made these really lovely interpretation boards, and they'll be there until the end of the project, which we just had an extension on, which is now until next year. But we've had other groups such as young farmers involved, we've had the parish councils involved, so really trying to kind of work across all ages and all demographics. Next slide, please. And finally, it's obviously about monitoring. So obviously monitoring can be a very laborious process, as I'm probably sure a lot of you know. But obviously there are ways in which we can make it more engaging, and by providing some citizen science opportunities for students and staff and our trainees, we're able to kind of involve them in the monitoring process. So we're looking at kind of carbon sequestration, so doing soil cores, doing gas flux monitoring, doing vegetation monitoring to see how these are impacted by the work that we're doing. And our students and the trainees have been able to work alongside staff members and scientific officers from Natural England and really learn. So it's helping that you know, sort of younger professional on their journey as well into sort of conservation and into the scientific community. Next slide, please. And this is also the case. Obviously, we've had the University of Northumbria support us throughout the project, helping us with the guidelines for sort of monitoring protocols and establishing exactly what we should do, where we should do it, working with Natural England. But then we've had their university students come out and do some water quality monitoring with us. And what was really nice was that we were able to go back into the lab with them and see how they then tested the water samples that they collected. So that's a really nice sort of ongoing relationship that we'd like to continue. So I think that's the last slide. So yeah, if you've got any questions, obviously, do feel free to drop me a line. Yeah, that's Sam with an inquisitive cow.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Helen, for all that. Yeah, a couple of contrasting but really interesting discussions. As I said, that there's no obligation to engage in chat here, but we've got a bit of time left if anybody wants to either ask a question or prompt a bit of discussion. Whilst people are thinking about that, one of the things that did strike me, I must admit, listening to both of those, is the issue of kind of public engagement. And I did want to ask you both, Helen and Tim. We seem to really interesting and as I say, very contrasting examples of how that's done with a children's book about the life cycle of a tree going through the construction process, and the ability to get the knitting club in Hebburn engaged in revitalizing estuaries. I just wanted to ask from your perspective, is it getting easier to engage people because we're all a bit more conscious of issues around biodiversity? Nature-based solutions, carbon sequestration, habitat restoration, they're quite kind of niche technical terms and potentially niche technical issues, but are we all finding it easier to get that engagement?
I would say probably not.
No.
If I'm honest, I think a lot of people are probably a bit saturated with kind of the impacts of climate change, and obviously we still think that people should be acting and should be trying to do what they can at home and the like, and I think people are genuinely, I think, just so busy, and we find if putting on public events in a lot of cases doesn't work. I mean, I've worked in the conservation sector for 30 years. I used to work for the Wildlife Trust and put on events at our reserves and things, and you'd usually get quite a good number, and we kind of struggle in some cases with those public events. And what I find generally that works better now is this approach of going directly into the community and working with an organised group. So it doesn't matter whether it's Scouts, it doesn't matter whether it's, you know, Nana Zoo Knit, it doesn't matter whether it's, you know, Blythe Hong Kongers. You know, that they all have their sessions, and it's just, I think, about adapting to the way that, you know, people's lives seem to be these days, really. And that, you know, there's that many, you know, I'm a mother myself, and I think, oh, I'd love to do that with my little daughter, but there's that many other options. And you know, Facebook just flings everything in your face, and you can never remember what you wanted to do in the first place. So I think, you know, kind of like, yeah, unless you've got a really kind of, I don't want to say an easy sell, but you've got a really beautiful, easy, accessible reserve or place like that, where, you know, dragging people down to heaven is probably not going to attract many people. But, you know, the local community really appreciate it, and the local community know the value in their local green space and what it does for them in terms of health and well-being. And you know, if we can kind of bring that in and then weave in some of our story and our narrative as well, then obviously I think that you know, ticks both boxes.
Yeah, and I guess, Tim, from your perspective, there's a community-facing element of this, but I guess you've also got to deal with your internal stakeholders, hard hat construction people who just want to get on and build a building.
Yeah.
And how do you engage them in this kind of conversation?
Well, I think the first thing is the same as Helen, you said, which is sustainability fatigue. There's a fatigue about, oh, is this a new initiative? You know, and you know, past initiatives, some have been good, some have been less good over the last few years, and there's this kind of fatigue, another new thing. But where it's been really successful is where we've actually listened and understood what matters to our people, because these things matter to everyone. It's just understanding how that manifests itself in 2024, which will be different to last year. And if we can listen to that and understand that, then we'll have more success. And yeah, well, I won't go on, but that's where it's worked well, where we've listened and understood and responded to that, and sort of framed it in a way that responds to that need.
And there's a question from Joe in the chat, and I'll not put you on the spot, but the hardest barrier to overcome when you're trying to engage communities who might traditionally be thought about as hard to reach, you could equally phrase that as seldom heard as opposed to hard to reach. But any real issues that you've managed to overcome?
I mean, I don't know whether it's just people are, and it doesn't matter what background you're from or where you're from. It's just people are that used to their own routine and their own world, aren't they? And you've got to find a way in which you can adjust what you're doing to fit into that world, I think, and to make it seem relevant. You know what I mean? But you know, I kind of, you know, think in a lot of ways, you know, kids are kids, aren't they? You know, and I don't think there's many children now who don't appreciate mini beast hunting or something simple like that did, you know, do the same 50 years ago. You know what I mean? So kind of some of the things I think are very, very similar. But, you know, if you can make that connection, if you can go and see whether it's the group leader or whether it's, you know, kind of, you know, I don't know, mum's group or anything like that, you know, it's kind of like, I mean, I used to work in Sheffield, in, you know, urban Sheffield on the River Don, and I used to go to a school in a city Sheffield, and the mums would drop the kids off at school, and I would stay there, and me and the mums would go out for a walk down the river afterwards, you know, but just a half hour, 45-minute poodle. But it got these mums who'd never ever think about doing that kind of thing on their own, you know, to come out and to do that. So I think, you know, there's ways to work with them, but you do need to be very flexible, and you do need to adapt to when, you know, you can't just put on stuff 9 to 5. You can't just put on stuff on a Saturday morning anymore, because there's that many other things out there that it just gets lost, I think.
And there's a big thread in the environmental sector now about, you know, if we're going to engage a much wider diversity of people in the work that needs to be done, then we as a sector need to diversify ourselves and bring new people into the organisation. So if you haven't checked it out, I'm going to have a look at New to Nature. and the associated Force of Nature campaign, which is running at the moment. So that's been a program funded by the lottery, which has enabled us to pay the wages of 98 young people from very diverse backgrounds who have now had their first experience of work in the environmental sector, working for everybody from the big charities like WWF at the top end down to much smaller localized organizations. So I think that's part of the solution for me. If we can have a different group of people within the sector, then we will engage more effectively and better with the wider diversity of the population.
I mean, the young people that we had employed, I mean, I know that was an employment sort of focus, but, in terms of the engagement as well, these young people are coming out and they're working alongside, the likes of Biomatrix Water, planting up these floating ecosystems, doing something that they probably never even knew existed before. And they're going to go home and tell their families and their friends what they've been doing, and I've got one of the lads who, is on Facebook and follows me on Facebook and still likes, and, and I'm thinking, well, if he's doing that, then, his wider network are seeing it. And, so yes, it might, it's not your sort of traditional kind of hard to reach group, but, that young sort of, sort of working class kind of, sort of, I don't know, probably, with not necessarily aspirations of going into conservation and the like, kind of opening up their eyes as to what's possible. These new innovations are great.
I've just building on that, I feel like some of these projects and initiatives that you undertake at Groundwork are sometimes the first time that individuals actually feel part of their community. And I feel like for me, what I've seen, that's a bit one of the biggest barriers, is that community just doesn't exist. It's just a collection of individuals, 50 or 100 individuals. So that approach you mentioned, Graham, it sounds like it's getting to the individuals and then bringing the individuals to a place where they get a feeling for what communities actually like and how it feels.
Absolutely, and if you don't address the issues that people are working with at the moment, and people have lots of issues at the moment, then you're never going to get them involved in a conversation like this. If someone doesn't feel comfortable in their community, full stop, they're not going to feel comfortable engaging in the open spaces and the green infrastructure in their community. So you've got to address those immediate present issues. I think that's what you said, Helen, in your presentation. You've got to go in with a conversation that's relevant to people. And then, increasingly we're finding ways of connecting that into environmental initiatives, outcomes, nature-based activities, because that is all becoming more relevant to people as more people, experience flooding or excess heat, or are just picking up on the fact that nature is in decline in their area. Then it is becoming one of those issues that people are genuinely bothered about. But you can't address it in isolation from the others about cost of living and utility bills and food prices. But I think one of the few upsides of where we are at the moment is that it's becoming patently obvious how all those things connect with each other. And you can't address one without addressing the other. Right, I can see there's been some really interesting chat in the chat. So thanks for all of that. That's all great to read and great to share. We do have a couple of minutes left. Should anybody want to ask a question of Tim or Helen, or me for that matter? But as I say, no obligation to. So I will close the door on that. And we promise to get you out nice and sharpish this morning to allow you to get on with the rest of your day. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you in particular for those people who might be celebrating a birthday today. I think there's at least one in the audience that I know of. So happy birthday. And I hope you have a really enjoyable day. Thank you very much to Tim for joining us this morning and for the work that Morgan Sindall Construction are doing with us. Thanks, Helen, for sharing all of that information. You'll see more of this stuff online on social media. We may well run further events like this about different aspects of our strategy in the future, so do look out for those. But have a good day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye now.